Parish, I want to welcome everybody. And I want to just introduce this series of sacred conversations that we'll be having on Wednesdays throughout Lent. By saying that this parish church has a long history of being a safe place for differing opinions. We American Episcopalians derive our ecclesiastical heritage from the Church of England, in which decades, if not centuries, of conflicts between Roman Catholics and Protestant factions were largely resolved during the reign of Elisabeth I. Her settlement is characterized by what we often refer to as via media, the middle way. We're a church with a very broad mind and heart, where we place a high value on seeking common ground. And in our baptismal covenant, we vow with God's help to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, and to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. In a society that seems to feed on strong opinions and being inflexible, we're striving to find the common ground on difficult and sometimes controversial issues, such as immigration, health care, cost of living, housing, and gun safety. So the ground rules for our gatherings during these Lent Wednesdays may be easier said than done. But in keeping with our core values, which you see on the back wall up there, and our baptismal covenant, we ask everyone to listen, to be respectful, and to respond in love to one another. So I invite you to join in prayer now. Bless us, O God, in this holy season in which our hearts seek your help and healing. And so purify us by your discipline, that we may grow in grace and in the knowledge and love of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Our moderator today is Elisabeth, and she's going to introduce our panelists. Isabel.
Thank you, Father Ron. Some of you may recognize me. I'm actually the Assistant Director at Teton County Library. But today I'm wearing a different hat, and that's as a church member of St. John's Episcopal Church. I'm going to admit to you I'm a little bit nervous, as somehow I'm the one that's kicking off this Lenten season of conversations, but we'll do our best here. The topic that we'll be discussing today is immigration. Immigration is a very timely and relevant issue nationally, and we've all probably seen that in the past year in the debates and dialogues, especially during this current presidential race. Today, as part of Conversations for Common Ground, I want to shift our focus of this national issue to how we see it locally. How immigration looks right here in Jackson every day, how it affects our long-term immigrant community, people who are our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, and the youth growing up and going to school with many of our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews. So I'll introduce each of our panelists, and they're going to talk for about maybe 5-10 minutes. As they're speaking, I encourage you to think about questions that you'd like to ask them, about things that you'd like to learn more or understand more about as you listen to their presentations. And we hope to leave ample time at the end to take your questions. So with that, I'll start with introductions. To my right is Elisabeth Trefonas. Elisabeth is a graduate of the California Western School of Law. She opened Trefonas Law here in Jackson in June 2006, and it offers a wide array of legal services. Originally one of only 3 lawyers with expertise in immigration law in the entire state of Wyoming, and the only immigration attorney on the western side of the state, Elisabeth's client base expanded rapidly. Additionally, because Elisabeth was the only bilingual lawyer in the region until Rosie Reed came on board and joined Trefonas Law, her practice provided and continues to provide access to the legal system for a severely underrepresented segment of the population. In addition to her immigration law private practice, Elisabeth serves as the supervising assistant public defender in Teton and Sublette counties, and she's held that position since 2013. She's admitted to the Wyoming, California state bars and all federal courts.
So I was actually one of 2 immigration attorneys until Rosie Reed came on board, so there's where our 3 got to. And some of you might know her. She's a phenomenal immigration attorney. I'm lucky to have her. She's worked with me for about 7 years now. So I think just to get on the same page, and if you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm not necessarily used to the microphone, but I want to talk a little bit about what immigration, what the categories look like. And so on the handouts that you were given, just so we know we have the same, or maybe a common vocabulary, at least know some different categories of things. The pie chart actually stole from John Huss. I guess I didn't steal it, I had his permission, but he's the other immigration attorney out in Casper. He'll be retiring next year, and then we'll be back down to 2 in the state. This pie chart very easily tells you what the types of categories of immigrants are, because I don't think in our news media or even in our conversations that's very clear. So very briefly, on the right side of this pie chart, you see a sort of dividing line down the middle, and on the right side you see where people are born here, born abroad, or naturalized. That category are all our U.S. citizens. So I was born here, I'm a citizen. My sister was born abroad in Mexico. I like to tease her sometimes about that, but she's just as much a citizen as I am. She was born abroad and declared abroad. And we have a lot of people who go through a very arduous effort to become naturalized. What's important to understand is once you're on the right side of that line in the pie, you're safe. No one can ever take your status away from you. That is not the majority of our community. The majority of our community is on the left side. Those are what we refer to as non-citizens collectively. One group of them, I put a question mark there. Those are for people that are undocumented. And a little bit of education while I have the microphone. If you're talking to a group of really devout immigration advocates, calling immigrants illegal is going to have some uproars. I realize that that's a word people may choose to use, and that's up to you, but just know your audience. In the immigration world, we talk about undocumented immigrants. The next category you have there is most of our community. Most of our community, if you ask me, they are undocumented, but that's probably why they came to my office, so maybe my view is a little skewed. The next category there is all of our non-immigrants, and you sort of see this alphabet soup. These are our workers. They're here temporarily. They can lose that status. And the next category of folks there are green card holders, or immigrants. They intend to immigrate here permanently. What's important about the left side of the pie is that all of those categories can be lost. And once they're lost and you're in the questionable part of that pie, your struggle here becomes very difficult, if not nearly impossible for me to help you with. And the problem with that is things expire, laws change, and then you find yourself stuck in the pie and there's no way to get out of it, in that question mark pie. Our goal in my office is to always get people on the left side of the pie, for starters outside the question mark group, and then to get people to the right side of the pie, so that they're safe. A good example is I have a very good friend who has her PhD in political science. She graduated from Berkeley. She was a green card holder, what I refer to here as a lawful permanent resident, or an LPR. She got into an argument out at a bar, had something to do with a boyfriend and a woman, and her green card was revoked. And there we were dealing with deportation proceedings. Why she'd never gotten her citizenship is something that I yelled at her for forever, but there we were fighting off the deportation. And there are lots of ways to do that. So just to kind of put us on the same page with the categories of people we're talking about. The next thing that I just want to bring to your attention is the second handout here on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. Actually, DACA and DAPA sort of fits into this question mark category of people. What it means is, a couple years ago, there was administrative action to allow people to say, hey, I'm here, I've showed you I've paid my taxes, I don't have any significant crimes in my history, and I'd like to get a driver's license and have work authorization because I've been here since I was 15, and I'm a good person, and I'd like to go to school. So So deferred action, and I gave the list of the requirements there for you. You have to have been under the age of 16 when you first showed up in the US. You have to have been here continuously for 5 years. That starts June 2012. And you can go through the rest of the requirements, but what's hard sometimes is just how arbitrary the requirements can seem. So I have a young man who came here the day after his 16th birthday. This does not qualify. DACA also said that if you applied before the age of 30, when this came into being, that you could have this DACA status. It's not really a status. It's sort of, like I said, it's a hands-off policy. It's you're here, we recognize you're here, you pay your taxes, you're a good person, you have an education or getting an education, and we're going to stop threatening you with constant fear of deportation, but just for 2 years. Then you can reapply every 2 years if you like. But then it doesn't go anywhere. There's no other, you just renew every 2 years. But for example, I have a client who's 33, been here since she was 3. This didn't apply to her either. So what happened, and I'll finish over, my 5 minutes is long gone past, but back in November of last year, President Obama and his executive decisions decided he wanted to extend the DACA program. And you can see there a list of things he extended it to. He changed the ages. He made it more broad. You could be any age. You could be 80 years old, and if you come here when you were 3, you could still qualify. And he also tried to start a program called the Deferred Adjudication for Parental Accountability. And that's for folks that are here with U.S. citizen or green card holding children. I was at the Village when the announcement was being read. I was skiing. And I had more texts and more phone calls in that hour that our office has ever had for parents. I had people bring deposits to open cases. And then there was a lawsuit, and now there's an injunction, and we've been sitting there ever since. So you know, interestingly enough, this case started in Texas. Texas thinks it's unconstitutional for the president to have made these programs. Texas won initially. Texas and some other states, because they won, there's now an injunction on these extensions, not the original DACA, gratefully, in my opinion. But on the extensions, there's been an injunction. So we've refunded people's money because we just don't know where this is going. It also lost at the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, and now it's presently sitting up at the U.S. Supreme Court. It was scheduled for oral argument this April, and the decision's supposed to be in June. And I think everyone knows with Scalia's death, that puts this case into a very interesting predicament. So I'm going to turn it over to the folks who have a lot of interesting things to say about their own bravery and history.
So our next panelist is also second to my right, my left and my right, should know this. And her name is Liz Garcia. Liz is currently a senior at Jackson Hole High School and will be graduating this spring. She's active in the high school cheerleading team and yearbook. She's taken advanced placement classes as a junior in high school and has participated in the Grand Teton National Park's Pura Vida Youth Leadership Program. I have personally, sorry, I'm going to turn it up. I have the pleasure of getting to know Liz the last 5 years that she's been part of the College Bound Latinas group that Letty Lear and I started when we met these girls in 7th grade. So I have seen her grow up the last 5 years, and today is actually their first time Liz will be doing public speaking outside of a school setting. I'm very proud of her, as you probably can tell.
I grew up in Jackson, and I have lived here my whole life, and I love it here. But what I see is that Jackson is also a place where some people do not have the same opportunity as others. One reason for not having the same opportunity is not being a U.S. citizen. Immigration statuses affect a lot of adults and a lot of teens that I know. Nowadays, it affects their lives, jobs, and the chances to live what we all want, the American dream. As a U.S. citizen, and as soon as we graduate from Jackson Hole High School, I thought a lot about my future, of where I plan on attending college, and how I plan to pay for it. That's why I plan on applying for scholarships and for student aid. I have also thought about what I plan to do after college, and that is to go to law school and become a lawyer. By doing that, I will complete the American dream for myself and for my family. The other day, I started thinking about my peers and the ones who will be graduating with me. Just by looking and asking, I see that some don't even bother on applying for colleges. You may ask why not. I asked a few of my peers why they don't plan on going to college if they don't plan on going to college if that's why their parents struggle to come here for, to give them a better life. Some answered, I would love to, but my family just doesn't have the money for it. And I can't get federal funds because of my status. Others just answered, I can't because I'm not legal here, and the places I want to go, they wouldn't accept me because I'm illegal. My immigrant friends are smart, hardworking, and capable people. They do great at sports and academics. Some are even way smarter than I will ever be. For them not to pursue higher education is just heartbreaking. My friends that were born in Mexico do not have a say in coming to the United States. They came as babies or young kids. Some didn't even know until recently that they didn't have legal status here in the U.S. until DACA came out. All I knew was that their families left because they wanted a better future for the kids, a life they wouldn't get in Mexico, and that their parents worked very hard and sacrificed for them. Some grew up in pretty hard living conditions, living in small places with a lot of people because their parents don't have great jobs. They have jobs that many people don't want to do. Parents don't complain or argue about these jobs because they know just by saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, it can affect them in the future of their families. But what these friends all have in common with me is that they've been going to Wyoming school since elementary school. Some have gone to school in Jackson since kindergarten. What's heartbreaking is wondering if some of my immigrant friends have legal status, would think about what is possible in their lives with their potential. What's also heartbreaking is that some of my immigrant friends who are applying for colleges like University of Wyoming aren't able to get federal financial aid. They're working hard to find and apply for scholarships that don't ask about status. I know that they and their families will have to make a lot of sacrifices to make it work. Some of these friends will be studying to become doctors, nurses, and engineers if they make it through the long journey of college. They'll be back in Jackson and other places near Jackson, sharing their skills, contributing to the community, and showing everyone that the American dream is still alive.
So our last panelist is Yadira Sosa. And Yadira is currently a Head Start preschool teacher through the Children's Learning Center in Jackson here. And Yadira was among the first generation of Jackson Hole High School Latino graduates that attended the University of Wyoming. She's a mother of 2 young children. I always ask her how she manages that and manages everything else. And she's part of a community of young bilingual Latino parents here in our community. I have gotten to know Yadira in the past year through her work as a community mobilizer for a project called Rolling into Readiness. Rolling into Readiness engages upwards of 80 children and their parents at a time in neighborhood-based kindergarten readiness activities. Over half of the families who participate in Rolling into Readiness are not involved in a licensed preschool or child care program. So in terms of finding and serving the families that tend to be falling through the cracks, our community mobilizers are very, very, very effective. One of Yadira's strengths is encouraging the 8 community mobilizers to develop ways to meet their outreach goals supportively as a team, and they've had great success in the less than 1 year that this project has been going on.
I want to share a little bit about the path taken by my peers who are immigrants and who graduated from the high school the same time I did 10 years ago, 2006. 10 years ago, there were not too many Latino Hispanic students graduating from high school here in Jackson. As a result, going to college was a dream that nobody knew how to approach. However, a recruiter from the University of Wyoming who came to Jackson during that year opened our eyes to how to make that dream come true. She shared with us that graduates of Wyoming High School, regardless of immigration status, could attend the university. She assisted myself and some of my peers to apply. all of my peers who are immigrants and wanted to go to the college now had the opportunity to attend the University of Wyoming. However, when we arrived at the University of Wyoming, my peers who were immigrants, childhood arrivals, found out that even though they had graduated from my Wyoming high school, they still to provide a social security number. Hearing that, some of my friends thought that that was the end of the dream. We sought help from the University of Wyoming staff who were interested in helping Latino students. After a process, they acquired a TIN number, a tax identification number, with which they could enroll and start their higher education. It was because of the generosity of local donors in Jackson community who supported scholarships that me and my peers had financial help for college. However, not everybody could make their dream come true. One friend's plans were cut off. This friend wanted to be a teacher. However, when it came time to do her teaching internship, she couldn't because in order to do her internship, she needed to provide a social security number and have a background check. At that point, she was halfway through her coursework. When she found out that she couldn't proceed with finishing her teaching degree, she quit school, moved back to Jackson, and kept her job as a waitress. After many of my peers graduated, some were able to work in the field related to their degree. For others, their immigration status prevented them from doing professional work in the field, and they had to go back to their regular jobs, such as cashiers, waitress, and things like that. It was sad for them that they had to put so much into their studies, and yet they end up in the same place they started. Some felt that while their experience of college was good, in the end it was a waste of time and money. When President Obama DACA executive order came into effect, for my peers that have to return to their previous work, it was like the beginning of the dream again. They were able to get a social security number and work in fields they wanted to be in. I proudly can say that I have friends that work in places all over Jackson where they are able to contribute to positive change in our local schools, as teachers, in law enforcement, and social services. Their presence is helpful to the Jackson community because in many fields of work, there is a real need for bilingual, educated professionals. Just as important, my peers work in places where other young people and students see them. They are role models to the next generations and are able to share hope that for that next generation, the dreams can also come true.
So I'm not certain how familiar these types of stories are for everybody in the audience. As I mentioned when I started to cry, I've been working with a group of girls since 7th grade, and I could say that they are a very diverse group of kids, all with great potential. Some of them will not have these worries that have been described by Liz and Yadira and Elisabeth. Some will. And when I think about the sort of the struggles, if in my library hat I sit on a group called System of Care, and it's interesting because periodically we have these discussions of, oh my gosh, where do we find people who are bilingual that we can hire? We just can't seem to find them. And then we kind of start, it's like trading cards, but then you kind of feel bad because you're stealing one person from another organization. So there really is a need here for that level of professionalism among people who are bilingual. And I think what I'm seeing right now, in the last 5 years especially, there's a great opportunity to home grow those professionals so that they can contribute back here in the community, because really there is a very strong willingness to do that. So with that, I think this is probably one of the biggest ways that I see immigration affecting our community right now and actually going into the future. And so with that, I would just open it up for any questions that you have. And please also feel free to use the tool that Ryan had described earlier. There's a pad and paper back there if you want to write down certain themes or things that you've heard. And we will be, as a church body, looking at those at the end of this Lenten season to see what are the next steps that we can do together as a church and as a community. So I'm opening this up for any questions anybody has. Bruce.
Elizabeth, if you were going to write an
Bruce, sorry, could you speak into the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm pretty loud, I don't think.
I know, but we're recording right now, so I want to make sure we can capture it.
Elizabeth, if you were going to write an immigration law in 1 hour or less, what would you have in that law? Just what would be the main points that you would emphasize in such a law?
That's tough. I like to say it's easier to just work for my client and not be the person who comes up with a way to reform it all. I think where I'd start, if I only had an hour, I'd get rid of the laws that exist presently and start again, because there's been so many Band-Aids put on it. It's almost like reading the tax code, the way the immigration code works. And I think that I first ask what are our core values and what are we trying to achieve with immigration. I think back in the day it was written for family unification purposes, and that has some benefits. I think what we're seeing is it needs to address work concerns and education concerns, particularly here in Jackson. I mean, the number, we do probably 4 new case consultations each week, and almost always it's an employer who wants to help an employee. It's usually that combination. And just about 4 out of 4 every week is, well, I'm glad you want to help, and I'm glad that there's resources to help, but under the code, I can't do anything for you. And that's certainly a problem. When the intent is to do things the right way, and the intent is to help each other, and there's plenty of resources to do that, for me to look at that person and say, but I can't under the code, it's definitely not functioning. So I'd start with tossing the whole thing, and then starting with what our core values are, and trying to address that in the it's a very difficult and complicated reform process. I don't even know if we can call it a process yet, but hopefully. Does anybody else have any suggestions on how they might do it?
Hi, I'm Liz too. I love this, Elizabeth, Liz, Isabel. My first question is for Liz. Can you talk a little bit about the resources you do have at the high school and how and what they're doing to get to some of these kids that you're talking about who really are feeling like they don't have that opportunity? And then I have a similar question. Is it Yadira? Once you were at college, were there resources there to help you assimilate to the whole college culture? I mean, they talk about not just academics, but so many things that make a difference in a college student being able to finish college and succeed.
Well, at the high school, we have, on Wednesday block periods, we have college ready, college and career ready. And for some, it's just getting jobs that you can have here if you don't want to apply to college. Or for the ones that don't have a legal status, their options are the University of Wyoming.
Do they help them actually apply? I mean, do they work with them?
Yeah, our counselors, if you have, if you need transcripts, if you need applications, our school pays the application fee for the University of Wyoming. So they don't have to actually pay for it for applying.
Sources?
Well, yeah, kind of a similar thing. When you went to college and once you were there, it just amazes me that they let this girl spend 2 years working towards a teaching certificate, and then all of a sudden told her she couldn't do it. It just seems like such a gap there. Are there resources that people just weren't aware of, or how does that happen?
Well, everywhere you go, they offer a lot of scholarships for first generation in the family and things like that. But they always require your social security number. So there's no way to get like any financial help or any help because everything requires a social security number. So when we found out that we have this opportunity to go to the University of Wyoming, they give you a number just to enroll in the university. But then after that, try to get some financial help or any kind of help, you can't really do anything because you always have to provide a social security number.
I don't want to cut Idira off, but the number that she's talking about is a valid number. It's a tax identification number. So for any immigration benefit, you have to show that you've been paying your taxes. And it bugs me to no end that people think that my clients are not paying their taxes is the first thing they're going to be required to get done and to show me proof of. But IRS is not concerned with immigration status at all. They would just like money. So they're happy to issue what's called a tax identification number. It's the same number of digits as a social security, and it's for purposes of paying your taxes. So that's what the students begin using to fill in the blanks that social security number request. It's a valid number registered to that person lawfully from the IRS.
But that number cannot help you or doesn't compare to a real social security number.
So currently you would need basically a social security number in order to apply for and qualify for FAFSA, which is the federal financial aid system. And so that's one of the barriers. And then also currently right now, as far as we understand, with Hathaway, you also need that. And so if there are sort of academically gifted students who don't qualify for FAFSA, who probably would qualify for a pretty healthy Hathaway scholarship, they can't take advantage of that. And so I'll speak a little bit of some of what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing for kids who are currently, their parents live in Jackson still, and they're at the University of Wyoming. It is not uncommon for the families to be struggling financially. And I've seen that in the past year, at least among some of the young students that I know. Phones get cut off, they can't make rent, all of these things because they're actually trying to help pay for tuition for, the sibling, the oldest sibling usually, who is starting off at the university. A couple of years ago, Letty and I were actually able to obtain some scholarship funds through the Mexican consulate. And these are funds that are available to any student who's of Mexican descent, whether they are a US citizen, not a citizen, or a citizen of Mexico. But those are very hard to come by. We sort of hit the jackpot that one year. And we were actually able to work with a number of community contacts here in Teton County to identify students. I sometimes see one student who I believe is still working his way through the University of Wyoming, and I believe he's probably going on year 6. And I see him here every summer, back here working construction. So it's a struggle. It's not, I don't think it's impossible, but when you think of how long it's going to take a student to kind of get through, if they'd had the assistance, they might have been finished sooner, and then coming back to our community to contribute.
What is your response to people who say we need to build a wall?
Actually, I don't know who's building it, we won't get into that, but I'm part of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is the largest lobby of pro-immigrant advocates of immigrants, lawyers around the whole country and outside the country, in fact. We are very pro having secure borders. In fact, even from those of us way on the very, very pro, we want everybody to be here side of things, we still advocate for secure borders. I think it's fairly reasonable. The problem that I see is that the law right now incentivizes employers to not follow the law. And if there's this need for workers, but there's no way to get them, or no way to have a sustainable program, then you can secure the border, but the incentive for people to still cross it, or for employers to still hire undocumented workers, is still there. So I think that across the board, advocates would agree that we need secure borders, and everybody who is here should be safe. But the incentive to do things the right way actually needs to exist, and presently under the code it does not. An employer who really wants that employee is going to have to break the law. Is our employers penalized for hiring undocumented workers? Very rarely. There's been 2 cases in the state of Wyoming that I'm aware of, and it was egregious, widespread, statewide, thousands of employees. Typically, when an employer has an undocumented worker and there's going to be some enforcement, they'll receive, it's called a no-match letter from the Department of Labor that says, hey, these numbers from Social Security aren't matching up with your names. You have 90 days to do something about it. And then if you don't, it's a $110 ticket. And then it goes up from there. But it's extremely rare the enforcement on the employer side. And very easy to fix once you're on the radar of the Department of Labor.
Good afternoon, my name is Pantir Sakri. I live here in the community. First of all, Liz, great public speaking. My compliments to you. That's hard to do in front of all these old people. And Yadira, thank you as well. And Elisabeth, thank you so much. My question is actually for Liz and Yadira, also having gone through our high school here. What is it like for you to go to Jackson Hole High School? Do you feel integrated? Do you feel that you're isolated? Has that changed over the years? Thank you.
Well, I can talk about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there were not too many Hispanic and Latino students in the high school. They did try their best to help us to accomplish our dream, because when we went to our advisor, they never say just because, or they never ask for our status. So they treated us like any normal student. But it's kind of hard when someone knows that wherever you go, you're gonna be asked for a social security number. So you do feel integrated to the community, but at the same time, you always have a shadow on you that you never know who knows about you and if you can be treated the same way or not. So I can say yes and no at the same time.
Well, now at the high school, we're just really like segregated. Like there's like if you would go to our school and you see like our lunch, it's literally like Latinos on one side and like Americans on the other, or like we're kind of just segregated people. Like my grade is really segregated. It's really just like not a lot of Hispanics hang a lot around with a lot of Americans. And if it is, it's like 3 people that like talk with other Americans. Maybe it was like different back then, like 10 years ago, but a lot of people just look at you're Hispanic, like don't bother talking to me. It's kind of how my grade is right now and how the high school is right now, to be honest.
Liz, do you feel like that's something that occurred when you were younger, or do you think it happened when you moved into adolescence in high school?
I think it happened when going into high school, because back then I used to hang a lot with a lot of Americans. Back in middle school, I hung out with a lot of Americans, and then in high school also depends on like just like the sports. If you're not in the same classes as them, it's just different. It's high school. Yeah.
My name is Barbara, and I'd be interested from the other 3 panelists what some of your thoughts are about, since we're here to find common ground, what are some steps, preferably the easier ones first, that the community could take from your point of view to get closer?
Okay, I'll take a step on that, at that one. I think, you know, and again, I think my viewpoint is a little bit colored because I've been working with students. And so I tend to see that any assistance or support that we can provide with students is going to be helpful for them. It's going to help with integration. And quite frankly, it will help with their families. I would say probably education is probably the one way for many of these families to help get out of poverty. And I do see generationally, sometimes, and I see this actually in my own family as well, a dependence on the younger generation to in some ways be the financial retirement account, if you will, for the family, and a dependence on them to do that through education. And so again, I think my view is a little bit colored. There is, you know, I think one of the things, and especially as the girls that we've been working with have gotten closer and closer to graduation, I personally have been feeling more and more pressure to try and help figure out ways to support their education financially. And currently I've brought up with some folks at the University of Wyoming, even just, is there something administrative that can happen for these students, or if there are questions that can be taken off of the applications for Hathaway, for example? Could we do that? I don't know, but that seems like one way, very specifically, I feel, that could create a different trajectory for these students, and I think ultimately for many of the families, the Latino families especially, who live here in the community.
I just wanted to point out how interesting it was that Liz used the word American.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought other people in the room caught that, because being Hispanic or Latino has nothing to do with whether or not you're an American, but clearly it does in our community. Vote, please. Our senators in the state of Wyoming, I blame them for immigration reform getting stalled, because for the last couple of years, we've been 2 votes shy of getting reform through the Senate. Now, obviously, there's more than just our 2. But if those things are important to you, then letting our senators know would be key. I've been informed by them very regularly that immigration is not a concerning issue for our state. It's not an issue for us. And I think if they're only hearing from me constantly knocking down their door, then they're probably right. But if they hear from our communities or from our state, I think that will go a long way. One way or the other, use your voice with them. Secondly, I think doing this. This is a great thing you guys have put together here this afternoon. I think it's showed people that what they have to say is important. I think that's very compassionate.
Well, I just feel like I think that just like Elisabeth said, doing things like this, getting to know, like people getting to know, like the stories behind those people, not just putting labels on them and just thinking that you know them. And like getting to know like each other, just like knowing each other's cultures too. Like becoming an actual community.
It's a really hard question, because I've seen when you are young and you're in school, it's a one community. Everybody talks to each other. Your kids, nothing, it's in your head, nothing wears you. But it is sad that now hearing that in high school, it's more like a label thing that if you look like this, you're going in this side. And I think it starts at home. That you talk to your kids and children and your family, that everybody's the same, we're all humans. Maybe once they get older, they might not think the way that they're thinking right now. Because I mean, it looks like in high school, they got labels. And like Lee said, they might not know the people. And us as Hispanic or Latino, we cannot wear a label saying we're illegals or we're undocumented. Which if you present your legal status to anyone, you never know what can happen to you. So it's a really hot topic, and there's not really a lot. Or as a community, we can all work together and say we're all humans and not label people. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't think the same way. So.
If an employer has a very valued employee that's undocumented, and he's been here a long time, been paying taxes, how difficult is it for them to get a sponsor and complete that process?
The law says that if you've lived in the U.S. in that questionable part of the pie, and you're here undocumented, the law says if you've been here longer than a year undocumented, you must return to your native country and reside there for 10 years before you apply for any immigration benefit whatsoever. There are very limited exceptions to that rule, like DACA, like DAPA, maybe, hopefully. There are exceptions if you're a victim of serious crime. There's exceptions if you're married to a U.S. citizen who, and you came in with a visa in the first place. There's also exceptions if you're married to a U.S. citizen and you're an abuse victim. The only other exception would be if you're an asylee and you're claiming refugee status, but you actually have to have made that application within your first year of being in the United States. So what happens is, in our community especially, is you have that person who's worked with you basically become part of your family for 10 years, and you truly want to help them be here without any fear. Unless they have one of these rare exceptions, they're supposed to leave for 10 years. And I should say, if you're here for longer than 6 months, you're supposed to leave for 3 years. That came around. There were some exceptions back before the 2001 U.S. Patriot Act, where you could pay a $1,000 fine instead of waiting 10 years abroad, and that disappeared with part of the Patriot Act.
So a practical question. My friend who is here undocumented, his wife who is here undocumented, have 2 children that were born here in the States. Now, if something went wrong and for some reason they got deported, the parents, what happens to the children?
There's a lot of things I want to say in response to that question. Judge Pete and Judge Anderson are the immigration, now just Judge Anderson, Judge Pete's been promoted. They're the immigration judges of Salt Lake City, which is usually the court I'm in. And Judge Anderson says it all the time, I'm going to deport you. I know you have U.S. citizen children. It's a parental decision whether they go with you to your native country or whether they stay in the care and custody of somebody else in the U.S. It's not an immigration concern. So I guess what happens is if a child who's a U.S. citizen, they can be adopted. So can an undocumented child who's been left behind. That happens quite frequently also. Because very often if someone's deported but their undocumented child is still here, they'll leave them with a family member or a friend to continue their education here and take that risk. Kids can be adopted, they can be custodians, they can have custodians. Jean might be the better person to answer all the different placements for children.
And it's kind of a different question, but how does Mexico view those children? As American citizens, let's say the parents were deported and they wanted to take their children to Mexico. What are their children's status then?
So just like my sister, they're Mexican citizens born abroad. So they were born here, so U.S. citizens, but they actually have dual citizenship through Mexico as well. Both their parents are Mexican. Or if there's some rules on if it's just the dad or just the mom, and if they were married or not sometimes. So I guess they're separated. The harder problem, I think, is visits, because the children could potentially visit Mexico, but the parents can't ever come visit here.
This is a question for Lisa and Yadira. Can you tell me examples? Because I think if I hear more doom and gloom, I'm going to hide under the veil. But can you think about examples of when integration happens right? And think about your work, think about your friends. Maybe it's not in school, and maybe school is not getting it right. But could you give me some examples of when it actually happens?
Elisabeth can talk to if she wants to.
When do you see integration?
I see it at work. I work at Head Start, and we teach, it could be like a dual class. We teach English and Spanish. And before that, I work in restaurants and other places. And usually I was the only Hispanic or Latino person. So that's where a real integration comes in the community. But I think when it comes to schools, I think it's the hardest, because especially in high school is where you are getting older and you're more mature and things like that. That's when they start labeling you. But at work, I think they see you more like just as a normal person.
Well, for me, I see it like in sports. Like a lot of people would join sports to get out of the comfort shell. I'm on the cheerleading team, and there's a lot of Hispanic girls, but there's also like American girls, and we all just, doesn't matter if what you are or anything, we all just there for one thing, and we all just trust each other. Same with like any other sports. You see now more that a lot of like Hispanics are getting out of the comfort shell and joining sports and going after things you wouldn't really see them doing. Like a lot of people joining robotics, a lot of people joining like football and wrestling and basketball. That's where you would see it in a high school situation.
We only have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Thank you. I'm Mark. I'm serving on that commission. Say that, acknowledging great weight that I feel to help with these sort of issues. I really want to express my appreciation for those of you who are up here speaking, and I really want to express my gratitude to those of you who helped put this all together. I don't know who exactly, but this is important. I really want to kind of ask from the point of view of our sausage makers, what the civic responsibility of our employers is. And, we have zoning regulations that certainly allow for a lot more expansion of commercial, and a lot of that could be to spring-based, it could be lodging. And at peak season, those industries are going to need a lot of employees. What's their civic responsibility? How should they go about helping with this situation? How should we go about really, supporting a vital community? But do we need to look at local zoning regulations? Are there rules? The county is an arm of the state, so we really are granted authority by the state. The town has the ability to pass ordinances. So there's some ability there to foster an environment that can help from the point of view of the workers we hire and attract here, all the way down through the children in our education system.
I mean, it's hard because to ask what the civic duty is, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm supposed to tell you you're supposed to follow the law. But, the question, I guess, for each employer is, should you be only hiring documented workers because that's following the letter of the law? And your responsibility is only that I-9 form. That doesn't extend past that I-9 form. Or do you really care about this particular employee and you believe they're a member of our community and you find it in your civic duty that you really should be hiring them even though they're undocumented? I think that's the question that our community asks itself quite a bit. I think there are a number of employers who say, this person's basically my family and I know they're undocumented, and until I can do something about that to help them, I'm still going to keep giving them the job. And I don't know if that's necessarily contrary to our civic duty or morals. I'll leave that to each person to decide. But you basically have an I-9 form. I don't know if anything can be addressed in any kind of zoning regulation. I guess the question would be, well, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve a workforce that's here completely documented? Then you're not going to have the current members of this community here. Is this a sanctuary city? That gets a lot of people very upset. I would argue that it's not. I've been here 10 years with hundreds of deportation cases, so I don't believe it's a sanctuary city in the slightest. But I think that's a question for, maybe we want to be a sanctuary city, and maybe we don't. I don't know. It's such a personal question and such a difficult thing for people to answer. And my answer, you could probably guess, but that may not be other members of my community. I think that's the point of your discussion here, is kind of figuring out where you are on some of these decisions, or where you'd like to see your church or your community be on them. But you guys have anything to add to that? Other than making it known that it's an issue for our state, and we're coming into election years, and why this is a big topic.
I'd like to thank our panelists